kiss for you.
We're taking a look at Diablo 4 here, and unlike the previous video on Path of Exile 2 or my video I did on Last Epoch, this is really just going to be an examination of Diablo 4 from someone who was a staunch, not hater of the game, but very much did not like a lot of the things the game was doing, and to see how it has improved as many people have been jumping back in for Season 10. And I guess I'll just start off with saying the top line here. I am quite impressed, especially compared to just coming off of something like Path of Exile 2, how much Diablo 4 has not only improved, but feels like it is a consistently good experience every time I play it. And that is something I did not get from Path of Exile 2, and that is something for the most part I also didn't get with Last Epoch, right? Diablo 4 here feels extremely good in its foundation, and that is something that I think Path of Exile 2 will eventually get to, and I think Last Epoch has to some extent gotten a good foundation. Its main issue is just the way that foundation has been built upon some systems that make it a little bit cumbersome to play, and also things like game feel, but we're talking about Diablo 4 here. So the overall thing you need to know is that Diablo 4 is a very good game and a very good title, and I think you should absolutely check that out, whether it be because there's a sale going on for like 60-70% off or anything else. This is a really great game that exemplifies, I think, a lot of the best aspects of the genre while sanding away a lot of the things that may be a little bit annoying. For a lot of people, in terms of when it started, especially now, that is something they do not want because they want something a little bit more hardcore or a little bit more complicated. But for me, as someone who did enjoy to some capacity, Path of Exile 2 a little bit and quite enjoyed Last Epoch, I'm not necessarily looking for something to be simpler. I'm just looking for it to be a little bit more rewarding, and I think that's really where Diablo 4 is shining currently. To recap my issues with Diablo 4, because I have mentioned it in a couple other videos, but I have not made a specific video on D4, my two main issues were the fact that early game, you could get very bricked very quickly by having bad builds early on. For example, in my Ranger build, having Penetrating Shot, which is the one that goes through both enemies, at the time that did 40, that cost 40 of your mana, and you only had 100 mana, and it was slow to recharge. So choosing Penetrating Shot early on was basically a death sentence because you could not kill enough of the mobs in time, and it did not do nearly enough damage for how much it cost to actually be able to build into it. That was an example of where I felt extremely underpowered because the mobs were coming at me. I couldn't deal with them. The Penetrating Shot was doing too much damage. I just built out myself very poorly. I came back, new season, new character, same kind of setup, but I chose Barrage instead, and I'm having a considerably easier and better time. So my issue at the start there, and my issue sort of still currently, is that if you make a bad build decision early on, it can really hurt you. So we'll leave it there. I'll come back to that. And the second issue I had is level scaling, which again we'll come back to, but I did have an issue early on with level scaling. The idea that the entire world is scaling to your level really didn't sit well with me, and again, combined with the bad early build stuff, it really felt like the early game of Diablo 4 really just hated you and wanted you to suffer because of the constant scaling of enemies and the bad build basically making it impossible to do a lot of dungeons, right? The reason that I kind of come back to these is because the bad build stuff, and to some extent the level scaling, but specifically the bad build stuff, can be not as nearly as bad, can be kind of fixed by the fact that it's extremely easy to respec. At any point, no matter what you're doing, you can right-click on the skill you've acquired and undo it. I don't believe you can necessarily do that for extensions, but, like you can't uninstall an extension, you can uninstall the entire core skill, like the base skill, right? But that is extremely nice. You don't have to pay a bunch of gold, you don't have to do all this other stuff, you can just refund, reset, try a different build, right? And that immediately, compared to anything else, compared to Last Epoch and compared to Path of Exile 2, is an incredibly good decision that really does help alleviate pretty much the entire issue of early bad build, because if a build isn't working, just try again, right? Try over. That is something that Last Epoch technically also provides. However, because of the way that the scaling of that game works in terms of like you leveling up your individual skills, if you refund a skill, you lose all that, not all that, you use all the levels to that skill, and then you dump it into another skill and level that skill up, right? So there's a lot more work that is involved in respecking compared to this, which is just right click, left click, right? And then the other issue of level scaling is broadly fixed by the fact that you have better build options and can redo builds at any point, but it's also less, it's better tuned level scaling. It's not as aggressive oftentimes, and it's one that I think is now tuned more around the power level and the power curve way better than it was originally in like Season 2 or 3 when I first played. Now going on to certain things, those are the issues that I broadly had with the original launch of the game and that I think are mostly fixed. Talking about some aspects of the game that I quite enjoy that are relatively unique to this game, aspects. This is the ability to go into dungeons and you gain an aspect for beating them. This aspect tends to apply to gear. You can go to the occultist, I believe, and aspect your gear. You can put gear and then you put the aspect in and it melds the two together, and then you have a very unique, interesting buff based on the dungeon you have, which makes dungeon farming quite fun, because as long as you target what you're looking for, you can aspect farm, and those aspects do quite a bit. So you can figure out, okay, what good benefit do I want on what piece of gear, right? So I quite like that. It gives you a reason not only to do the dungeons, but a really nice progression point there. Tempering is something they added in the Season 4 Loot Reborn thing, which is similar to how Last Epoch does it, but I also like how this system does it. Not more, but I definitely like the fact that it's here. It's the ability to basically temper, which is using specific affixes, and not gems, but using specific, they're called affixes, in this one to boost gear. So it might be like, oh, you have a chest piece, you want to add defenses to it, and you have 3 different options, right? It might add health, it might add defense chance, it might add dodge chance, right? Things like that. So I really like that, how it is still random, but it is basically based on whatever armor piece you're getting, right? And the benefit of something like this compared to Last Epoch is that Last Epoch has certain gem slots, effectively, that you have to use up, and it's quite annoying to have to re-gear those, right, if you want to remove those, because you often lose a lot of the benefits. This is the kind of system where you don't lose those benefits, right? Basically, like, if you had a tier 4 gem of some kind that was really strong, and you wanted to remove it and replace it with a different gem that's tier 4, you're going to re-roll those stats, right? In this case, you don't have to re-roll things because you can just put a gem there, put an affix there, and have it roll, right? Like, it's a simpler process, but it's also one that allows you to target, farm, and gear a little bit better, which is quite fun in this game. The other thing I really like that is unique to this game, I believe, obviously, Path of Exile 2 has something similar in their gem sockets, but this one is a free ability to unsocket and add gear sockets to any gear you have via the jeweler. Very nice flexibility there. It doesn't feel like you stuck or made a wrong decision. You can just freely swap whenever you want to. Another thing I really like that is just based on how the game operates in terms of its progression. Clear progression with skills. Now, oftentimes people think this is a detriment because of the way that skills work in the game. I think it's a benefit. The fact that you clearly know where skills are going, what effects those skills are going to have, so you can build out whatever build you want, is very nice. I know immediately, hey, my basic forced arrow is going to cause vulnerability. And then I check the other 3 options. It's like, okay, it can either cause more crit, or it can cause immobility, plus more damage. I went with that, so now I can build that into my barrage. And where does a barrage go? Oh, I see ahead. It goes to this thing or this thing, right? That's a much better system in my opinion, which is also a system that Last Epoch uses, right? And it's the idea that you can see ahead what you can put your skill points into for each of the skills, right? Each of the abilities, I guess. And that allows you to see ahead and build ahead where you're going. The problem with something like Path of Exile 2 is that it does that a little bit, but it's so disjointed and so antithetical, really, to how that game operates in terms of the scope and the skills, that it doesn't really feel like you're supposed to do that, right? Like, that I kind of find oftentimes if you have to go what's inside a giant spreadsheet of all the skills and all the trees and stuff in order to see what skills go to where, it feels like that should be in the game, at least to some capacity, right? Like, it feels like, yes, there's recommendations of where to go and what to do, but it feels really hard to discern and differentiate, okay, why would I use this skill? Where is this skill eventually going when I add more stuff and when I level it up? Is this skill going to be viable at endgame or in the later game, or do I have to replace it, right? That stuff is very easy to see in Diablo 4 and Last Epoch, and is also something that is I would think not as much of an issue, but in Path of Exile 2, it's a big deal. It's like, hey, is this skill going to work long term, or is it going to be outdone and outdamaged by a different skill later on, right? I would like more clarity in that for that game, but for this game, I really appreciate that level of progression in the skills. And then the bottom thing is just like the open world, the fact that it's a whole map, all the waypoints accessible whenever you want, town, portal, that kind of thing. Versus the other 2 zone-based systems. I would generally prefer the open world stuff that Diablo does, and I mentioned that in the Path of Exile 2 video about how that I'm not really a fan of that checkpoint system. This whole map waypoint thing works a lot better. You can go around any point in the map and open it up and then directly go into any zone. And while the enemies respawn, the map does not completely redo itself, right? So you're able to see things on the map and see dungeons and stuff without needing to re-go through an area, which is very nice. And so overall, I just think that Diablo 4 is in a much better spot than it had been in the previous seasons. Other than some issues relating to performance, I did notice, and you can see in the top left corner, there are some issues relating to performance metrics in terms of, like, I disabled crossplay because that was causing some like lag for server stuff, and I turned on DLSS because the normal native resolution is kind of rough for some reason, so I just turned on DLSS and it fixes the problem. I've been hovering around 80 to 90 FPS in towns and about 100, 110 in the overworld, which I consider pretty good. But I did remember it running better, right? Because I have a 4080 and a 3700K. Like, these are high-end specs, and so to have it running at good performance, definitely stable performance, but definitely less than I thought it would be, is definitely quite interesting. And then I would obviously just say that, like, you know, this is a game that a lot of people have scorn for because it has things like a battle pass and you know, a shop and stuff like that, and for whatever reason during sales it's pushed more frequently. So I would say that's really the only downside in terms of how things operate, right? Like the performance not being as good, which is a thing that can be fixed, and the fact that it does sort of push these aspects of it. The other thing I would say, this is not really a negative, but just to note, I've seen a lot of people kind of mention and talk about the expansion. I don't have the expansion. I'm not interested in getting the expansion. If the expansion's ever on sale again for a, you know, $15 or whatever, I'll pick it up. But a lot of people say the expansion is not worth it. The good thing, and the thing that I think is really important, I didn't mention this in the Borderlands 4 video, but I guess it bears repeating here, or not repeating, it bears mentioning here, is that Diablo 4, they feel like full games. And I think that's really important because that is something that a lot of people overlook, right? In ARPGs, oftentimes, these games are just, oh, it's a mean to an end game, and what's the end game like? This feels like a full game. I'm doing the campaign because I didn't finish it, right? This feels like a full game. It feels like you have the full open world, the full accessible tools and everything, and it feels like a full featured game, and then it has endgame, right? Oftentimes, a lot of these games, Last Epoch kind of feels like that, Path of Exile 1 kind of feels like that, where they're not really full games. They feel like they're sort of half games, and then you get to the end game, and that's where a lot of the systems open up. You don't really feel that in this game. It feels like a full quality experience with the campaign, with the missions, with the dungeons, right? And then you get to endgame. And that's really important to convince people to not only spend money on the game, but also continuously support it through Battle Pass and stuff as new seasons get added. So I did want to mention that because it's something I did not mention in my Borderlands video that I did want to mention, and it also applies here. This feels like a full game, and that's really important when, you know, you have to spend money on it, and they want you to spend more money on it, right? But I did want to kind of make that clear because not all of these games do feel like full games, right? Whether it be because they're in early access or because they just don't feel complete. This does absolutely feel like a complete game, which is not a high bar to clear, but it is definitely one that's noticeable in a space, in a landscape that oftentimes does not feel that way. So if you enjoy this kind of stuff and want to see more of these things on the channel, make sure to like, subscribe, do all that, and I'll see everyone in the next video.